welcome to our Bible Ponder for this week. We are doing a series on the genealogy of Jesus, and we're going to be looking in the next few weeks at Matthew's genealogy and then Luke's genealogy, and then tying it all together after that. So last week we had a quick introduction where I talked through the weeks and what we're going to be looking at. So if you want to go have a watch of that, it's just a couple minutes long and it'll tell you where we're headed. Today we're going to do part 1 of Matthew's genealogy. Tomorrow we're going to look at a different aspect of the genealogy, but today I called this Numbers and Promises. So I want to talk through a bit about how this works and what's going on in the genealogy, what the problems are, and what we can kind of take away from this. So we'll start off, I'll read the genealogy, and then we'll talk about some of what's going on there. So I'm reading from the NRSV. Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. An account of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Aram, and Aram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah, and Solomon the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam the father of Abijah, and Abijah the father of Asaph, and Asaph the father of Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, and Joram the father of Uzziah, and Uzziah the father of Jotham, and Jotham the father of Ahaz, and Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, and Manasseh the father of Amos, and Amos the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers, at the time of the deportation to Babylon. And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Salathiel, and Salathiel the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, and Abiud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor, and Azor the father of Zadok, and Zadok the father of Achim, and Achim the father of Eliud, and Eliud the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar the father of Matthan, and Matthan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called the Messiah. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations, and from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations, and from the deportation to Babylon to the Messiah, 14 generations. So what we have straight away to look at, and one of the first things that you might hear talked about with this, is the numbers. So the very last verse there, Matthew 1:17, mentions 3 sets of 14 generations. And that's really nice and tidy, and you might think, oh, that's really convenient. It's a bit too convenient, for one. If this was actually trying to be a perfect and accurate genealogy, you would certainly have a problem. But one of the other problems you have is that apparently the author of this maybe just can't count. So you have, if you actually sit down and count the names, you get 14 in the first group, 14 in the second group, and then you have 13 in the third one. So you don't actually have 14, 14, 14. So you might say, well, maybe this is an accurate genealogy and the author is just trying to sneak one bias. Maybe it's 14. But you have some other problems there if you're trying to do that. First of all, if you're actually checking this against names in the Old Testament, one of the first things that you'll see is that there's at least 4 kings just completely left off that are mentioned in the Old Testament. Between Joram and Uzziah in the genealogy, you have Ahaziah, Athaliah, Jehoash, and Amaziah. So you've got 4 kings from the Old Testament that are just completely left off the list entirely. Maybe that's to make it a tidy 14, 14, 14. But again, you have 14, 14, 13. So none of us really know why there's only 13. So the best we can do is shrug. Well, I don't know. And we can talk about theories for why there's even an attempt to have 14, 14, 14. And there are a few different theories for this, none of which maybe capture everything, but they're interesting anyway, and I think they're helpful to help us get the sense of what's going on. First, you have that it could be due to the lunar calendar being 28 days, so 14 being half of that. And then with the lunar calendar, it's kind of marking out epochs of time, and there's going to be more on that a bit later, but kind of talking about the lunar calendar leading, sort of in a right time to Jesus. So that's one theory. You also just have, in terms of numbers, that 14 is 7 times 7, or 7 plus 7. So 7 is a really important number in numerology, and especially for Jewish numerology. And so having two sevens kind of in there is an important number. Also, if you look at King David's name, if you take the Hebrew letters, it's 3 letters. It's D, V, D, or Dalet, Vav, Dalet. And that, if you assign numbers to that, it's number 4, number 6, and number 4. So you add those together, that's 14. So that's one theory. It's also a group of 3, and 3 is also important. Things like the Trinity as the biggest example of that, but groups of 3s are important. So you have 3 14s, so 3, 2 times 7, or all of that kind of works together to kind of make it important. But it's also marking, kind of more importantly than just the 14, the 3 periods are Abraham to David, David to the exile, exile to Messiah, are kind of marking out really important epochs of time. And so the author is, tidying up what is supposedly Joseph's genealogy in order to make it fit, but also kind of marks these 3 epochs. So it is just nicer, literarily, I think. And also notice, too, that this genealogy is theoretically Joseph's, not Mary's, even though with the virgin birth and the doctrine of that, Joseph is not biologically involved, but you still, because of the patriarchy, you still inherit through your father. So even though Joseph is not involved necessarily in Jesus's birth, in that sense, Jesus would still inherit from Joseph, and Joseph is from the line of David, and they go to Bethlehem, which is what follows. So nothing really explains it perfectly why we have the 14, 14, 14, and also why there's a mistake, but we have those theories. But more importantly, what's really going on here is the messianic line, and also the line of a true and full-blooded Israelite. So you have these kind of 2 prongs. So it's a royal line all the way back to David, and there's the covenant with David and the thought that the Messiah would come from the line of David. And then also all the way back to Abraham. So Jesus isn't just some Jew. He can trace his lineage back to Abraham himself, and so he is a Jew of Jew. And both of these are really important for the entire book of Matthew. So right off the bat, the author of Matthew is really setting the tone for the whole rest of the book and for what's to follow. So what this is cluing your ears to, if you were one of the first hearers or readers of this book, this is a very Jewish book. And this book, Matthew, is especially very likely written for a Jewish audience or a Jewish Christian audience. So they would be familiar with the themes and the names and the ideas and the symbolism and everything that's involved in sort of all of Jewish history. So the writer of Matthew is really pulling on a lot of things from the Hebrew Bible in order to make this book up. So you have the royal line to David, the true Israel line, all the way back to Abraham, but not just in terms of inheritance, but in terms of covenant promises. So if you remember the video, if you watched it, you can go back and watch the video about covenants. 2 of the main covenants that God has made with humanity are to Abraham and to David. And so this isn't just birth order stuff. This is about covenant promises, the fulfillment of these promises. But there's a lot in Matthew that is very, very Jewish, like I said. So you have stuff about covenants. You have a lot of stuff about King David and the kingdom of heaven, and stuff about a lot of like son of David language comes up a lot, son of David. And a lot of stuff about David in the book of Matthew. There's a lot of royal imagery in it. And you also have a lot of the sort of true Israel, new Israel stuff of Jesus and baptism, and the new Moses, John as Elijah, and all of these sorts of symbols and Jewish history is really packed into Matthew in a really dense way. And so you can see that right off the bat, that's what the author is doing, really setting the tone for the whole rest of the book. There's an analogy that I use, especially with the book of Acts, how the Acts starts with the ascension of Jesus and very much presumes the fact that Jesus was dead to begin with. And so I always talk about the Christmas Carol book by Charles Dickens, but especially to me, the true Christmas Carol is A Muppet's Christmas Carol. So you have the Marleys were dead to begin with, is how that begins. And as Gonzo, as Charles Dickens says, you must remember that fact, or nothing that follows will seem wondrous, he says later on. And for the book of Acts especially, you have to remember Jesus was dead to begin with. Otherwise, nothing that follows will seem wondrous. But that same kind of principle holds true for other books in the Bible, and especially here in the Gospels. They aren't just random words put onto a page, but they're crafted literary works. And so you have to look at what's happening here and why is it here. And so besides the 14, 14, 14 in groups of three, and is it a correct genealogy, and is it skipping people, is it missing people out, or whatever is going on, what is happening here literarily is setting the tone for the whole book. This is Matthew's The Marleys Were Dead to begin with. And this clues you into what's going on and what's at play through the whole rest of the book. And if you're writing for a Jewish audience and a Jewish Christian audience, and your main people that you're in conflict with in the first century as Christians are other Jews, then what your main focus is when you're speaking to Jews about Jesus and trying to legitimize him and trying to say, you should really take this guy Jesus seriously as the Messiah. What you maybe want is a genealogy, something that traces his lineage to King David and to Abraham himself. And so that's a really useful starting point for Matthew as a very Jewish gospel, to begin there with that genealogy. Right off the bat, he is trying to legitimize Jesus's messianic status, his messianic title. And that sets us up for the whole rest of the book, as we get a lot of Jewish symbols and a lot of stuff about King David and a lot of stuff about kingdoms and messiahs and battles and all of that sort of stuff. So that is part one of Matthew's genealogy and a bit about what's going on there. Next week, we're going to look a bit more at a few of the people mentioned, specifically the women's names who come up in the genealogy and why they're there and maybe why they shouldn't be there, and why it's really interesting that the author does include them, or even not just include them, but specifically bring them up. So that'll be next week. We'll dive into that for Matthew's genealogy, part 2. So thanks for watching. Thanks for joining in. We'll get to a Zoom discussion for this after Christmas, once we've wrapped up all of this whole series. So thanks for joining us, and have a great evening.